Welcome to episode 51 of Priviso Live, your weekly dose of ICT legislation, risk, information security, and AI news. I'm Lynn, and with me, as always, are my fellow hosts, Stephen and John.
Hello, listeners.
Good morning, all.
Today we're covering quite a hefty agenda, from one of the biggest supply chain attacks of the year to some unusual behavior from China's Great Firewall. And we'll wrap up with a sensitive but important topic about security controls during organisational retrenchments.
Thanks, Lynn. Before we jump in, I have to say, it's been quite a week in cybersecurity. Sometimes I feel like we're living in a real-time case study of how interconnected our digital world has become.
Absolutely. And that interconnectedness is exactly what makes supply chain attacks so devastating. Speaking of which, shall we dive straight into the SalesLoft drift compromise?
Let's do it. This is a story that's still unfolding, and frankly, the blast radius keeps expanding. So, John, for our listeners who might not be familiar, can you give us the elevator pitch on what happened with SalesLoft drift?
Sure. Between August 8th and 18th this year, attackers managed to compromise OAuth tokens associated with SalesLoft's Drift AI chatbot service. Now, Drift integrates with customer systems like Salesforce, and these compromised tokens essentially gave the attackers a golden ticket to exfiltrate massive amounts of sensitive data from hundreds of organizations' Salesforce instances.
The scale here is just staggering. We're talking about companies like Cloudflare, Zscaler, Palo Alto Networks, and Tanium, major cybersecurity firms that you'd expect to have robust defenses. It really shows how supply chain attacks can bypass even the best perimeter security.
That's what's so insidious about these attacks, isn't it? These companies weren't directly targeted. They became collateral damage due to a trusted third-party integration.
Exactly. And here is where it becomes particularly interesting from a defensive standpoint. Okta actually managed to avoid this issue entirely. Their security team had implemented additional monitoring that detected the suspicious OAuth activity early and blocked it before any data could be exfiltrated.
That's a great point. I read their incident report, and they specifically mentioned they had enhanced monitoring on third-party integrations. It makes you wonder, how many organizations are actually implementing those kinds of controls? Because let's be honest, most companies trust their SaaS integrations implicitly.
So what should our listeners be doing right now if they're using SalesLoft Drift or similar integrations?
Well, the immediate action is obvious. If you're using Drift with Salesforce, you need to audit your data to see what might have been accessed. Organizations should regularly audit their third-party app permissions, implement conditional access policies, and monitor for unusual API activity.
And this is where I get on my soapbox about zero-trust architectures. The traditional trusted inside, untrusted outside approach no longer works when your inside includes dozens of SaaS applications with varying security postures.
Stephen, you mentioned zero trust, but let's be practical here. For smaller organizations that don't have dedicated security teams, what are some actionable steps they can take?
Great question. First, regularly inventory your OAuth apps. Both Google Workspace and Microsoft 365 have built-in tools for this. Second, implement multi-factor authentication everywhere, not just for user accounts, but for service accounts and API access where possible. And third, consider tools that can monitor API usage patterns and flag anomalies.
I'd add to that, don't just focus on the technical controls. This attack succeeded partly because of social engineering and insider knowledge. Regular security awareness training needs to include scenarios about supply chain attacks and how employees might unknowingly facilitate them.
One thing that strikes me about this incident is how long it took for the full scope to become clear. We're still seeing new organizations disclosing breaches related to this attack.
That's the nature of supply chain attacks. The impact cascades through the ecosystem over time, and it raises important questions about disclosure timelines and communication between vendors and their customers.
Which brings us to an interesting regulatory angle. With various data protection laws around the world requiring breach notification within specific timeframes, how do you handle the notification requirements when you're not even sure if you've been affected yet?
That's a good segue into our next topic, actually. Before we move on, though, any final thoughts on SalesLoft drift?
Just this. If you're a CISO or security manager, use this incident to discuss third-party risk management with leadership. Budget discussions become much easier when you can cite real-world examples like this.
And for individuals, this is a reminder to regularly review the apps connected to your personal accounts as well. The same OAuth risks are present in your personal digital life.
Now, let's shift gears to something that might be affecting millions of Microsoft users. Stephen, you've been following the story about Microsoft deleting passwords. What's going on there?
Well, the headline is a bit sensationalized, but the underlying issue is real. Microsoft has been gradually moving users away from password-based authentication towards passwordless options like Windows Hello, Microsoft Authenticator, and hardware security keys. What's happening is that they're automatically removing stored passwords from Authenticator for users who have successfully set up these alternative authentication methods.
I have to say I'm conflicted about this. From a security perspective, it's absolutely the right move. Passwords are the weakest link in most authentication systems, but the way it's being rolled out feels a bit heavy-handed.
So if I'm a Microsoft user, should I be worried about being locked out of my account?
Not if you've correctly set up alternative authentication methods. The issue is that some users might have set up these alternatives, but haven't tested them thoroughly, or they might have backup scenarios they haven't considered, like accessing their account from a new device while traveling.
This is actually a perfect example of why security transformations need to be gradual and well communicated. The technical security improvement is sound, but the user experience and change management aspects seem to have been overlooked.
Speaking of unexpected changes, John, you wanted to discuss the China firewall incident?
Yes, this was fascinating from a technical perspective. On August 20th, China's Great Firewall exhibited some unusual behavior. It blocked all traffic to TCP port 443, which is the standard port for HTTPS, for about 74 minutes.
What made this unusual is that it wasn't their typical selective blocking. The Great Firewall usually targets specific protocols or content, but this was a blanket block on an entire port. And 443 is crucial. It's how most secure web traffic flows.
Do we know if this was intentional or accidental?
That's the million-dollar question. The researchers who detected this couldn't identify the device fingerprint, which suggests it might have been either new equipment or existing equipment in a misconfigured state. The short duration, just over an hour, makes it feel more like an accident or a test.
From a cybersecurity perspective, this underscores the fragility of our global internet infrastructure. China effectively demonstrated that they could completely sever HTTPS traffic if they chose to. This has significant implications for businesses operating worldwide.
How should organizations that operate internationally think about these kinds of geopolitical internet risks?
It's about diversification and redundancy. Avoid relying on single points of failure, such as communication channels, data storage locations, or internet service providers, and have contingency plans for when certain communication methods become unavailable. I'd also say this incident is a reminder that internet freedom isn't guaranteed everywhere. For companies handling sensitive data, you need to understand the legal and technical landscape in every jurisdiction where your data might transit or be stored.
Now, I want to shift to a topic that's unfortunately very relevant in today's economic climate: security controls during organisational retrenchments. Before we dive into the technical aspects, I want to acknowledge that this is a sensitive subject. We're talking about people losing their jobs, and that has real human impact.
Very relevant in South Africa. This week, sobering Q1 estimates were released. ArcelorMittal 4,000 direct jobs, 100,000 downstream. Glencore 2,425 direct, 17,000 indirect. Ford South Africa 470 direct, Bearshoek Mine 688 direct, This amounts to a total estimated 291,000 jobs lost.
At a point where it is estimated that 27 South African children perish daily from malnutrition.
That really is awful. And the unemployment rate in South Africa is already catastrophic. Expanded unemployment of 42%, and for those under 25, 62%.
It makes me angry. It didn't have to be like this.
Absolutely, Lynn. However, retrenchments and rumors of retrenchments increase security risk for any organization.
That's exactly right. This isn't about treating departing employees as threats. It's about managing risk during a vulnerable transition period while maintaining dignity and respect.
So let's talk about the pre-retrenchment planning phase. What should organizations be thinking about before the actual layoffs happen?
The initial step always involves inventory and assessment. You must understand what access each affected employee has, not just their primary systems, but privileged access, shared accounts, and critical data they manage. I've seen organizations discover that their database administrator was the only person who knew certain system passwords.
Knowledge transfer is crucial here as well. It's not solely about technical access. It also involves institutional knowledge. Which processes does this individual oversee? What vendor relationships are they managing? Which client contacts could be impacted? This information needs to be documented and handed over before the actual termination.
From a technical security perspective, what are the immediate actions that need to happen on the day of termination?
Account deactivation has to be immediate and comprehensive. But here's where many organizations stumble. They focus on the obvious accounts but forget about service accounts, shared accounts, or third-party systems where the employee might have separate credentials.
Device collection is a crucial component. Laptops, phones, security tokens, access cards, but also include personal devices that might store company data or apps. And don't forget about physical security measures. Badge access, parking permissions, keys to filing cabinets.
What about the monitoring aspect? Should organizations be watching departing employees' activities before the termination?
This is where it gets ethically complex. Enhanced monitoring can be justified from a security perspective, especially for employees with access to sensitive data. But it needs to be proportionate and legally compliant. You're looking for anomalous data access patterns, unusual downloads, or attempts to access systems they don't normally use.
I believe the key is to have these monitoring capabilities as part of your normal security posture, not to implement them specifically for watching people you're about to dismiss. That feels more ethically sound and is likely more effective too.
What about the human side of this? How do you maintain employee morale and trust during retrenchments while still implementing these security measures?
Communication is everything. Be transparent about security procedures without being accusatory. Frame it as a standard process, not as a distrust of individuals. And train your HR and security teams to handle these conversations with empathy.
I'd also say, don't make the departing employee's last day a parade of security theater. Collect devices professionally, explain the process, and treat people with dignity. Word gets around about how you treat people on their way out.
Are there any regulatory considerations organizations need to be aware of?
Absolutely. Data protection laws like Papaya have specific requirements concerning employee data. You need to consider what personal data you're collecting during the security process and how long you plan to retain it. If you're in a regulated industry, there may be particular rules around personnel changes.
Don't forget about contractual obligations either. Review employment contracts for security clauses, non-disclosure agreements, and any industry-specific requirements. Some client contracts might require notification when key personnel change.
What about the aftermath? What security measures should remain in place after the retrenchments?
Ongoing monitoring for unauthorized access attempts is essential. Change any shared passwords or system credentials that departing employees had access to. Also, consider extra security awareness training for remaining staff. They might be taking on new responsibilities and access they are not familiar with.
This is also a good time to review and update your overall security policies. Retrenchments often reveal gaps in processes or documentation. Use this as an opportunity to strengthen your security posture going forward.
Any final advice for organizations going through this process?
Plan ahead, be systematic, and document everything. These situations are emotional and chaotic, but security can't be an afterthought.
And remember that this is ultimately about protecting everyone, the organization, the remaining employees, and yes, even the departing employees. When done right, clear security procedures provide certainty and protection for everyone involved.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from supply chain attacks to geopolitical internet risks to the human side of security during complex organizational changes. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I think the common thread through all of today's topics is the importance of preparation and planning. Whether it's third-party risk management, authentication strategy, or handling organizational changes, the organizations that fare best are the ones that think through these scenarios before they happen.
Absolutely. And I'd add that security is ultimately about people, protecting them, communicating with them, and treating them with dignity even in difficult circumstances. The technical controls are important, but they're only effective within a framework of trust and clear communication.
That's all for the 51st episode of Priviso Live, and thank you to our listeners for your support.
If you want to hear more of the same, subscribe to Priviso Live on Apple, Samsung, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or YouTube.
And if you need security, risk, or ICT legislation advice, contact Priviso Consulting directly at admin@priviso.co.za.
Stay
safe,
safe,
everyone.